Welcome to Alt-Centrism Central Podcast. This is the first episode of our podcast. And for those listening in, we are doing our first episode of this podcast. This podcast will cover issues from economic, political, and societal issues. For today's podcast, today we have me, your host, Boomer Ted Cruz, and we have our other host. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I am me. I am the other host.
All right, and then we have our guest today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
That's a great introduction. My name is Spicy Lashaga.
Oh, very nice, very nice.
Very good to have you. Thank you for being here.
Happy to be here.
Thank you very much. And today's topic, we're going to go over corruption, and specifically, our other host would like to go over specifically illegal activism and whistleblowers, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
First, he'd like to talk about the direction we'd like to take today's podcast.
So, the reason we're doing this podcast is we want to talk about serious political issues in a humorous, kind of lighthearted way. Our ultimate aim is to understand the reasons and convictions behind why people believe what they do, and I think that's the first step to tackling the toxic political polarization in our country and in the world, is to just understand each other. So in the future, we would like to hopefully get a recording studio and have well-known guest speakers. Our guest speaker today actually is extremely well-known. He's got, 6 PhDs, right, Alex?
Oh, yeah. 7.
Sorry, 7. My bad. So this is generally how our podcasts are going to go. We're gonna make our opening statements. We're gonna introduce the topic for the episode, and so then we're gonna discuss the topic of the episode. We're usually going to allow our guest speakers to speak first after we introduce the topic. A big thing about our show is that all research and opinions are not going to be shared beforehand. That way, we don't know what each other is going to say. And hopefully that'll be more enjoyable to watch. And then in the last few minutes, we're going to make our closing remarks. We're going to make announcements. So if you become a fan of our channel, please make sure to stay until the end, because we'll be making announcements at that time. But that's about it for the direction we'd like to take this podcast. So the first thing I'd like to do is, let's create a group definition of corruption. So what are you guys' thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know. Corruption is it's a little bit. I think it's a little bit difficult to define. I mean, we talk, especially in New York State, talks a lot about corruption, and Cuomo and his administration having the most corrupt administration that New York has ever seen. But I think corruption is really just living by someone else's own morals. So if you, in my own definition, the way I see it, is if you are living by someone else's rule, or you are manipulated by another person, that would be you being corrupt. That's you only wanting to better yourself, at least in the governmental political standpoint. It's the betterment of someone else over either your own thoughts or the betterment of the people.
All right, so essentially what you're saying, just so that I understand this, is you're saying that corruption is when you forego your own moral standards or your job description for the purposes of others.
Exactly.
Okay. Peyton, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to just use the textbook definition of corruption, because I think that suits, and what Alex said is somewhat what it is.
Yeah, let's
but
go with
I would say the best definition we can give is dishonest or fraudulent conduct by those in power, typically involving bribery. And I think the bribery part of it is pretty true. Most of the time when corruption is going on, I'd say money is a factor.
Mm-hmm.
Almost always.
Unless you're
like
Monica Lewinsky.
well, unless you're Monica Lewinsky, but there's another factor there, and it's pretty long. But I don't really want to get into it. But yeah, other forms of payment. But yeah, it's usually about the money. It's not about the people themselves. Well, a lot of people in the reactionary right wing circles, they talk about how democracies and republics and any form of government, really, leaders are incentivized when they don't have a certain grasp of power to export themselves because they want to make themselves wealthy. They have an incentive to do so. They want to make themselves better.
Right.
And that's why I think when corruption happens, it's usually because they're trying to obtain more wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Look at any corrupt individual, pretty much ever, any corruption scandal, money is almost always involved.
So basically, any major politician, no?
So,
yes.
So in your mind, money has quite a lot to do with corruption.
Definitely, I think so.
Okay.
And
all right. So let's that actually leads well into the next thing I want to talk about. In some states, there are now laws that are being created in regards to private prisons and illegal immigration. So there is a lot of money involved, and it's also a very hot button topic today, which is immigration. Specifically, let's look at Arizona's law, SB 1070. Basically, what happened there was it was a law that basically allowed law enforcement to detain illegal immigrants and put them into private prisons. So now, is this a case of corruption, or is this a case of we don't know what to do because we have so many illegal immigrants? I'll share my source with you guys, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. So right off the bat, my source is NPR. What do you guys think about the source? Is it trustworthy?
I'd say NPR. NPR can be considered a trustworthy source. I think what a lot of people need to do when they do fact checking and they look at sources is, first of all, always read the entire source. Make sure you're getting all the information. But second of all, look where their biases align. Look where their incentives align. I mean, NPR, for those who don't know, stands for National Public Radio. And it's a publicly funded organization, meaning the government is the one publicly funding it. So you have to think about, where that might play into. I don't think into a story like this exactly it would play into it, because the federal government doesn't have all the ties to private prisons. Right. I know there are federal private prisons, but this one seems to be specifically a state issue and not a federal issue. So. And I would also say NPR has more of a left wing bias. They're still pretty factual most of the time, but as for the laws themselves, and is this like an incentive of money, and is it a corruption thing, or is it a dealing with the actual problem? I really don't know. I would say immigration is one of the hot button issues of our time. Obviously, I mean, the government, as of the recording of this podcast, is still shut down.
Mm-hmm. So
and it's all over that.
Yeah. So what this law does, and what people are saying that it can do, are two different things, though. What this law does is it allows law enforcement to detain anybody if they cannot show proof of citizenship or of identity, basically. So, say that you were walking on the street in Arizona, policemen could definitely detain you if you did not have identification. Um, and so then what this does, uh, or at least what NPR is suggesting, is that this law allows for more people to enter the private prison system for profit.
So after reading the source, it's I think it's making a mountain out of a molehill, because you're right. That's pretty much all this law says, is that police can detain anybody who can't provide proof of citizenship or proof of residence, which sure might seem bad for someone who's in a northern state, but someone who's lived in the southern states, near where a lot of immigration happens, illegal immigration happens, might be more keen to agree with this law, because it is hard to find and stop illegal immigration, and it is a state issue, and Arizona definitely just wants to at least curb the amount of illegal immigrants crossing the border, and this is one way to do it. It's a drastic way, but it's an effective one, probably.
Mm-hmm. So there is an infographic in the source that shows how many elected officials from the state receive money from private prison companies.
Mm-hmm.
How much does that affect your judgment on this article or your opinion on this topic?
Not at all. I mean, private prison companies, or any company really, does not give money to politicians to change them. They give it to politicians who they think will take them far. So similarly, the NRA supporting Republicans is not them corrupting Republicans and saying, hey, pass our laws. They are supporting the Republicans because of the fact that they agree with them. I don't think prison companies give enough money to the point where they would be the number one thing to change about an entire law system. And this doesn't necessarily only help private prisons, but everything else as well. So I don't think the giving money is the biggest thing here.
All right.
I think I'm conflicted on this issue, because there are two parts. One that loves the idea of the law because I think it could help curb illegal immigration, and then there's another part of me that believes that this is kind of a violation of our constitutional rights. It's kind of like detainment without any reasoning, because while if you fail to prove permanent resident status or citizen status, yeah, to most people it's like, well, that's just reason, but what's the context of someone doing this? Like, is it someone who's being stopped for like a traffic ticket, or is it just a police officer going up to any random person, which I don't think would happen anyways. I mean, usually a police officer only approaches someone if they see them doing something suspicious or see them actively committing a crime or something like that. It's not like just going up to random people and being like, hey, I need you to prove your citizen status right now. But I think it's just that.
Sorry to interrupt, but we're going to get to police force corruption a little while later too.
Yeah, and but really, I just think with this law, it depends on the context of when these police officers are doing it. Because if you just stop someone on the street, by chance they might not have an ID or any way to prove their citizenship, and then they can be detained for that, despite not doing anything wrong.
I think that's a good point. That's a good point, because it's you can't just stop somebody and search them. That totally violates the Constitution. So I think it'd be more along the lines of how we deal with drug laws. So if most cops aren't going to stop somebody and say, hey, let me search you for marijuana, or even if probably find someone smoking, they'll just let them go, because it's not even worth it at this point, because so many people do it. But if they find somebody who was going 50 in a 25, and they pull them over and they smell weed in the car. Like, that's just another thing to get them. That's just another thing to tack on. I think it's similar in that they would find somebody who maybe was in a car speeding, and they pull them over and they can't prove their permanent citizenship. They find out they're an illegal immigrant and they can send them home, because I think a big issue is that the illegal immigrants who come here and commit crimes then don't get deported because you can't necessarily prove that they're an illegal immigrant, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
I somewhat agree. Yeah, but I think kind of going back to our main topic, corruption around this. So I really agree with what Alex said about giving money and the corruption. Because as I full-heartedly believe, it's not the NRA who corrupt Republicans, and I'm saying corrupt loosely and in air quotes because I don't think they're corrupted for sticking by gun rights, but it's the Republicans come in with this mentality of supporting gun rights and not limiting them and not limiting manufacturers, regardless of manufacturers and the NRA donating to them. When a company gives money to a candidate, it's a candidate that they think is going to further policies that they support. I think sometimes that they'll be bought on issues, but these issues typically are more minor issues and more case by case when you see that. I think a wonderful example of corruption, and it's like very, very obvious. John Stossel, who is a great reporter, did a video about this, but it was in New York City, and there was this excellent piece of land that a company wanted to develop on. They wanted to create a new apartment building, and they wanted to provide free transportation services and a park. And it's the property itself was in New Jersey, but it was like across basically the size of a lake from New York City for people to commute, to give more housing to New York City, and it would have been more affordable to a lot of people. Well, the state of, I think it was Newark, New Jersey is the town, but they came in and they seized the land with eminent domain. They said they couldn't build there. Instead, they built a sanitation field, and instead, the reason they did this is because they were basically in the pocket of this other realtor who was making property around the area and even across in New York City, who was found to be, actually giving these people money. Like they were living in his realtor, in his real estate at a discounted price and everything. The mayor and several members of the city council were found to be living in his real estate at discount price. I think that's a great example of money turning people on certain issues, and I think it's when it becomes more specific. I couldn't say on these laws that it's 100% corruption and it's the private prison system trying to collect more money and more prisoners, because they are for profit and the incentive is there. But just because the incentive is there,
Right.
I don't
So
think.
what you're saying is that you require proof before you say that it's corruption.
Yeah,
Speculation is not good enough for you.
yeah, just giving money, just private prisons giving money to the legislators who co-sponsor the bill, and something the source doesn't mention is, when was this money given? Was this money given 3 elections ago? Was this money given this election? Was this money given shortly before the bill?
That's a good
You know,
point.
that would be more evidence to the fact. I don't think it would be the firm to prove that there's a corruption connection. I think people are too quick to jump and say it's corruption when money is involved, even though I think that most corruption, stems from money.
I think corruption. I was talking about this earlier. If we're the multiple definitions of corruption, the money thing is great, but the money is really hard to pinpoint because there's so many people who donate so much money to campaigns. But I think what really makes somebody corrupt is their morals. So if you only, take it back to an issue that's kind of already been dealt with, NRA supporting, Ted Cruz after the Florida shooting, or there was that big thing that came out with the March with Our Lives thing, and they all fought that. But it's not just corruption of money, but corruption of morals too. If you're an immoral person and just taking money so kids in schools die, which is not what he was doing, but regardless, if you're morally corrupt, then it doesn't matter how much money you take because you're still a corrupt person. I think corruption in government is a really easy thing to tackle. You just give the government less power, because then it doesn't matter how corrupt they are, they can't do anything to you.
Yeah, I agree definitely that the government should have less power, and corruption wouldn't be as big as an issue if the government had less of an impact on your life. Which I could argue that the government already doesn't have the hugest impact, even though it's trying to increase how much of an impact it has on your life.
Well, something I would like to add here, and this could be a topic for a whole nother episode, is the topic of power, because government is not the only entity that has power over our lives. So I think corruption can happen anywhere where there is a power or potential for power. So, for example, cartels are very organized, structured entities similar to a government, and they have a lot of power. They can just as easily mess with your lives like the government could. So I think that's just something important to keep in mind.
Oh yeah, and I mean you could argue corporations as well. I think though that the government is the biggest actor who has the most
Sure,
power over your lives.
They're the ones
If you're
that are
talking
most
about corporations
and involved.
Yeah, if you have talking about corporations, I think the most corrupt corporations, or the corporations that could have the biggest impact on your life,
Google
are monopolies like Google, monopolies like YouTube. These ones that have been created. Disney, for example. Though Disney, you could argue to a lesser extent, because Disney does have competitors.
Disney has
and quite a lot of them.
Life, okay, Disney is the worst. They ruined Star Wars. I'm sorry, but
Disney ruined a lot of things.
They're so corrupt. All they wanted
was
to just
corruption
milk
of money
out of the franchise, and then they ruined it for us. They're destroying our lives.
Of course, yeah. Well, you could talk about corruption on there. If we want to talk about corporation corruption, I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but there was a Star Wars fan film that was created about Darth Vader, and it was created by a YouTuber called Star Wars Theory.
That was a really high budget production. Yeah.
Yeah, very very high budget production. Big time production. It was crowdfunded and everything. And Disney tried to come in and say, this guy couldn't crowdfund to make this movie. He did it anyways and was able to do it. And then when the video comes out, the first episode of this Star Wars fan film, what Disney does is they claim the video and they say, we're gonna put ads on it, because the creator didn't want to make profit or ads on it. He just wanted it to be there for the fans. There were no ads when it first came out. Well, Disney put ads on it and said, we're going to collect all the revenue from this, even though they had zero involvement. All of it. All of the ad revenue.
It was just
intellectual property. That's a topic for yet another episode. Oh,
yeah.
Wait, was this on YouTube?
This was on YouTube.
Yeah.
It's a very I highly recommend it to anyone who likes Star Wars. It's a very good fan film. But
what's it called?
It's called like Darth Vader or something.
Yeah, they had a very high budget for production. They hired a professional movie crew, and they actually did auditions for the right voices and people who looked similar to characters.
Yeah, they did. They went full out, and they crowdfunded this, and they had, got a lot of money for it. But Disney, decided, even though this was supposed to be like non-profit, and the guy was not making any profit and didn't want to, put ads forcibly and took all the money from it. But they were saying like if he attempted to appeal this decision, that they would copyright claim the video and just get rid of it, and that it would be gone forever.
Yeah, that's how.
And
Yeah, that's YouTube, honestly.
Though luckily Lucasfilm came in because in the contract that they signed with Disney, there was something specifically to prevent things like this from happening. They came to the rescue and said Disney could not do this and that they were violating the terms of their contract. And it was even talks that potentially Lucasfilm would no longer be owned by Disney if these contract violations continued. So I mean that's a very recent example of corporate corruption. But I think like honestly, even in this case, it didn't have the biggest impact on my life. Like it had big impact on that guy's life and the people who worked on that.
Oh
But
no,
for me,
I
it's
was
not
I was talking about the Star Wars 7, 8, Rogue
Yeah.
One, those new films.
I think
Thing
those
is-
had a really big impact. I mean, I personally talked about 7 and 8 a lot because of the fact that it wasn't just that they ruined it, but it was a major problem with all the movies now, and they all were just there. It's not corruption of money. They're not doing it for money. I believe they're all corrupt in that they're all trying to push the same political agenda. I mean, they remade Ocean's 11, Ghostbusters 2, Star Wars 7 and 8, all these new movies that are coming out that are just trying to shove some sort of political agenda down your throat. I mean, even
Oh yeah, and you know what? The producers of Star Wars have been extremely vocal in public about what their agendas are. I cannot remember what her name is. The director for the Star Wars movies. Do you guys know?
it's not a woman. Are you talking about Rian Johnson? He directed Last Jedi. J.J. Abrams is
Rian Johnson.
produced. He directed 7 and he's
Kathleen Kennedy.
9.
That's her name.
Oh, you mean the woman that's in charge of all the Star? Yeah, she's kind of like the Kevin Feige to how the Marvel universe is, where she's supposed to like plan it out. Except for they have no plan for these movies at all. On to what you said about they're pushing a political agenda. Yes, I agree. They're pointing a political agenda, but I think they honestly thought that they were going to make money. I mean, Star Wars 7 is so obviously a attempt to appeal to fans and cash in on Star Wars fans. It's pretty much a complete retreading of A New Hope. I think the money was involved there too, because you could also talk about like the most recent Gillette commercial, the razors. Have you guys seen this?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah,
I
about
seen
the.
but I heard about it.
Well, basically, it's kind of a thing about men, and men should be better, and men should not do this, and men should do this, and
Men should
blah
be
blah
women.
blah. Men should be women. I think that's something they allude to or even outright say. I can't remember because it was a pain to watch that entire commercial, even though it was so short. But I think I think all these companies who do these kind of things, like Burger King's pink tax commercial they had a few months ago, I think they all think there's like underlying money, whether they're trying to appeal to a market. But it's just like so weird. Whenever companies do political agendas, I feel like it's always they were trying to appeal to this market and create like a dedicated base, and think that if they appeal to them politically, that somehow they're all going to get business from these people.
I disagree with that, and the only reason I disagree with it is because of recently EA and DICE when they made Battlefield 5, and they said, "Hey, if you don't like our game, don't buy it. If you don't like the messages being said, don't buy it." I genuinely think they believe in their political agenda, and as a video game company or any company for that matter, your goal is the profit. Your goal is to make as much money, sell as many copies of whatever it is that you're doing. You make money from whatever you're doing, and they are so blinded by the fact that they need to do this agenda. They need to have this in their game. They just totally forgot about everything that's in front of them. And I mean, now Battlefield 5 is already on a sale for $30, and it's only been out 2 or 3 months. And that's almost unheard of from video games that are AAA titles. And that's, I mean, they're not the only company that's done that. All these companies will say that and then take huge hits for their games. I mean, but games like Red Dead Redemption 2, where there was a lot of people upset about it, and they said, like, we're not going to change it for historical accuracy, do better, much better, than the games who try to force a different political agenda down their throat. So I don't know. I think corruption sometimes hurts the people who are even being corrupt. And I think EA and DICE are a very good example of that.
Yeah, I guess you could say. I mean, that comment that they made, don't buy our game if you don't like the message. I feel like yeah, this is partly it's partly true. There are definitely people who are working on these movies, who are working on these games, who are working on these in these companies who definitely wholeheartedly believe in the agenda, but I don't think it's everyone in the company. I don't think it's I cannot see a company, sacrificing their entire profits and just to be to make a political message. And I think there has to be a profit incentive for them to do it because, companies have a responsibility to not only their investors, but everybody who works for their company to make money. Because if they don't make money, the investors don't make money, the workers don't make money, nobody in the company makes money. And I think that it's definitely an incentive there because they think that it's going to appeal to people. Like, Star Wars 7, I don't think it was as heavy-handed as with political messages, so things to say. I think it was more just a corporate cash-in on the series, retreading of New Hope. Let me show you stormtroopers, let me show you stuff. If you recognize all this stuff from Star Wars, let me show it to you. So you come buy tickets and munch on your popcorn in our movie theaters, and sit next to me who hates pickles and will vomit at the sight of them. Big ol' ass pickle and munch on it and make a lot of noise and ruin my experience.
Wait, I actually have a story about alright, so I recently flew. I was 3 days late because of the airline I flew on. I flew on United Airlines. United has a pretty bad rep right now.
Aren't they the ones who dragged out that doctor
Yep.
and beat him up?
Yep.
And they also 4 out of 5
a while ago.
recommend United.
Also, they had a story of a flight attendant who killed a dog. She shoved it in the overhead bin.
Oh no.
Oh yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah. So they basically have this system where I don't know exactly how many tickets. What I assume is you have the basic economy, the economy plus, and the first class. Now, my dad and I flew home last week, or this week, I guess, and we flew quote-unquote basic economy. And because of that, for some reason, and the storm in the Northeast pushed our flights back a few days, and when they rebooked us, they booked us on different flights. So we wanted to be on the same flight, so we went to the customer service desk when we were, that morning getting on the plane, or about to anyways, and we said, hey, we want to be on the same flight. And he said, well, I can't do anything because it's just basic economy tickets.
Ooh.
A few hours later, my flight, because we were on the same flight to Denver, Colorado, and then our flight split. When my flight in Newark, where I was going after Denver, got delayed, so I wasn't gonna be able to get home. My dad, we both walked up to a customer service desk and we said, hey, we need to get this figured out. Like, I as a 17-year-old can't be stuck in Newark because I have no way to get a hotel or anything like that. And she said, I'd love to help you, but you're only basic economy.
Ooh. Wow.
So basically, if you pay more money, you get to cut all the lines and you get treated like an actual human being instead of just another number. But that's just I think a very recent example of corruption in a company, because airlines like Southwest never had that problem before.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that's a highlight of though an example of where corporate corruption is definitely affects you But I think what distinguishes corporate corruption from governmental corruption is that most of the time, and there are exceptions to this, we mentioned them, Google and YouTube, most of the time you have another option. I'm assuming in the case of you that everything worked out, and I don't know how it worked out, but by chance did you go to another airline or?
Oh no, I mean now we will. Now it's like a never going to use United again type thing. But you're right, competition does create that.
Yeah, and when you have more competing airlines, more competition in the market, it's very hard for companies to get away with corruption, and they have less of an incentive to do it.
There are way less airlines now than there used to be. But we have to move on to some new topics, though, because we still have yet to talk about police, and we have yet to talk about specifically New York State. And I also wanted to mention the Federal Reserve and some useful resources for corruption. And there's also whistleblowers and illegal activism. So we got a lot more things to talk about that we got to get through. So
and
here's the next thing that I would like to talk about. Start it at the specific time that I shared it at. Basically, this is an excerpt from the LA 92 riots where an Asian shop owner shot a 15-year-old girl in the back of the head after she walked away and refused to pay for an item that she didn't have with her. She left it on the counter, I believe. There was a little bit of a physical altercation. But essentially what happened was, say you walk up to the counter, you want to pay for something, there's a verbal altercation, it gets a little physical, and then you're just like, fine, I'm going somewhere else. Shop owner takes out a gun, shoots girl in the back of the head. The jury found her guilty of voluntary manslaughter and should have gotten a minimum of 16 years in prison. But what ended up happening was that the judge passed down a sentence of, I believe, 400 hours of community service and 5 years probation. And this is her reasoning for it if you watch the video starting at that time. So I'm going to put it on my screen so that everybody else can see it. And yeah.
It is not a time for rhetoric, which serves no purpose other than to fuel the fire. It's like throwing gasoline on a fire that's already burning. It is my opinion that Mrs. Du is not a danger to the community and that she is not going to reoffend. I know a criminal when I see one.
I know a criminal when I see one.
I know a person who presents a danger to the community when I see one.
Yeah, okay.
When I don't, I treat that person as something other than that.
So, yeah, you guys can stop watching right around there. What do you guys think about that?
I have no words. I'm speechless. Damn. I don't really know what else to say because that's freaking nuts. I mean, I couldn't imagine someone getting away with this like this.
This whole thing started, the LA riots started because Rodney King was beaten senseless and almost to death by cops for a relatively minor thing. I mean, it obviously didn't warrant getting beaten almost to death, right? I believe the cops asked him to stand still or get on his knees or something like that, and he didn't because he didn't know what was going on. And so the cops, their defense was, well, we were afraid that he had a gun or that he was going to shoot at us, which he did not have a gun. So yeah, they beat him senseless. That went viral. Actually, the police officers got what was coming to them in the original trial, but then their lawyers decided to move the trial somewhere else, to a more white community, and then their sentences got overturned, and it was much more lenient. So there's a lot of judicial corruption there and a lot of police corruption, and I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts on this. I think this is just corruption all across the board. The reason the LA riots happened is 100% on the fault of the government and the people who work for the government.
Well, okay, this is coming from the son of a cop, but I don't think that the police in general are corrupt. I don't think,
well, right.
because
I wasn't
similarly,
trying to paint something, across the board, across the whole United States, but in this particular instance.
well, yeah, I mean, definitely could take apart this instance, and I would 110% say she should have gone to jail, because nobody deserves to get shot in the back of the head doing nothing wrong. I mean, it's just right. Nobody deserves that.
Peyton?
And
oh, sorry, you weren't done.
I just astonished. I even from this one specific case, yeah, I'd say that they made a wrong choice, but also that happens.
Yeah,
and nothing you can do about it now.
I think the biggest point to make here is, many people do not care about their local elections and who's in their local government, but it can actually have the biggest effect on your lives. I mean, because this person, I think her name is Joyce. Joyce, yeah, that's the judge's name. Because she was elected, uh, that 15-year-old girl, Latasha Harlins, didn't get any justice at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's really important to pay attention not just to corruption on a national or global scale, but, right in our own communities.
Yeah, sorry, I'm yawning. But
Too boring for you?
oh, not that it's too boring. It's 8:49 and I'm a little tired boy. But actually to go on to to go on to what we're talking about is this is a great point that Joe is making about local elections. Too often people are only concerned with what's happening in federal elections if they're concerned with politics at all. And what people don't realize is that the more local you get, from going all the way down from global to federal to state to local elections, the local government has the most impact on you out of any government that could have any impact on you at all.
Yeah.
This is something that I was first introduced to this idea by my old debate coach, who is a very wise woman and very great person, and very articulated in politics. And she, reprimanded me when I was first getting into politics about how I did not really care for state and local matters at all. I thought they were boring. I didn't think they were important or interesting. But she kind of educated me. I've become more involved in state politics. Local politics, I'm still having trouble with. It definitely doesn't help when you're, a new move to a new area.
Yeah.
It's hard to get. It's hard to, get a feel for it, especially if you weren't there, your whole life. But yeah, I think they're very important, and I think this goes back to the distinction we were making between corporate and government corruption. With corporate corruption, most of the time, if a corporation is being corrupt in the way they're giving you a product or the way they're doing a service or anything they're doing, you can always choose to go to another corporation. You can boycott it. You can, help organize worker strikes. There are things you can do. But when it comes to a government, I mean, you can't choose another government. The most you could do is vote, but one vote is worthless in the grand scheme of things. And this is not a racking against going and voting. I still think people should vote because that's how you get a big enough voting pool that can have anything done. But this is the problem. We have to wait a certain amount of years for anything to happen. And there's so much insider trading and so much insider groups that help each other. I mean, look at this case. Look at the fact that a court hearing was moved to another district. That should not happen. It should the court hearing should happen wherever the crime happened. It should not be moved.
Just a clarification. The reason it was moved was so that they could have a jury of their peers. That was their reasoning for it.
I don't think that's a justified. I don't think that's a justified.
I'm not saying it's justified
reasoning.
either. I'm just giving you their justification for it.
And I appreciate giving me their justification for it, but when it says a jury of your peers, it means a jury of the people, affected by this crime. The people affected of this crime were not the people in a whole nother neighborhood. The people affected by the crime were there. And, this is not rallying against the police officer in any corruption case, because I think a lot of examples of police corruption that we see that get big news coverage, I think a lot of them are like bashing of the police, and a lot of them are not in factual basis. But, and I don't know a lot about the LA riots, and if exactly what you said is completely true, then yeah, this is obvious case of police corruption and the police not doing their job. But specifically to talk about Letitia Harlins, I think that's terrible what happened with the Asian woman, and honestly, I and this is not a justification for what she does. This is just an explanation. I think the reason she shot Letitia is, she's probably such a nervous wreck with the entire neighborhood being destroyed in this riot, and the thought that she didn't want to pay for it. She's probably so antsy that she shot her out of complete fear. And this is not to justify what she did, just to explain.
Another disclaimer: this event happened before the city was in full scale riot, before there was martial law and a curfew and things like that. So while I can understand, there was a lot of tension in the city at that point, but it wasn't full scale rioting yet.
Well, yeah, okay. Tension
that changes the context.
Tension can do a lot of things to a lot of people. But I think that now there's a lot of things happening. There's been so many cops who have gotten killed or watched someone die because they've been too afraid to pull the trigger. They've been too afraid of what's going to happen with the media. There was a case not too long ago of cops in California who saw a man walking with a knife, and they got out their beanbag shotguns, and they got out their rubber bullets, and they got out their tasers, and they tased him. Well, they were too far to tase him, so they shot him with rubber bullets, and he was almost unfazed by it, and nobody was willing to take out their gun to shoot him because he was a Hispanic man. They were all white cops, and he killed a woman because of it, and he ended up getting shot anyways because, well, he just killed somebody and he was going after the cops. So, but
you make a good point, touching on a subject that we could talk about on another episode. Again, that not everything is black and white, and not all situations require the same kind of response. And sometimes it's just very difficult to gauge what needs to happen.
Yeah, exactly. That's my exact point. And in all honesty, it's kind of hard for us. It's easy, I guess, for us to sit back with hindsight and say, why'd you shoot that 15-year-old girl, or why'd you shoot that man right then, or whatever. But hindsight's always 20/20. You kind of have to take it more what's happening in the moment. Forensics now could easily tell you where a person was facing, if they were turning around, how close they were to the bullet when it was fired. But even since the 90s, it's questionable how accurate the forensics was. I know it's not that different, but we've made a lot of advancements since the 80s and 90s, and it's just impossible to know every angle.
Yeah,
and I think that especially from the story of the cops, and they go to a different neighborhood, that's not right. But if you start in one trial and you only have one trial, I think it's pretty fair to say they looked at everything and she decided, especially because it wasn't like white versus black. It was a Korean immigrant shooting a black woman.
Yeah. So
it's I don't know. Every situation needs to be looked at through its own specific scope.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I think
so. On the topic of more local things, though, you guys know, fun fact, that New York State is one of the most corrupt states?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, not surprised. I
Um,
remember also seeing
yeah.
a thing that it's one of the worst women worst. This is kind of unrelated, but it's also one of the worst states for women entrepreneurs.
Yeah,
It's
there are a lot of
actually
barriers
it's
to
tied for
entry.
last with California.
Mhm.
It's the worst state for entrepreneurs in general.
Yeah.
Can't really start
Yeah.
your own business in New York State, California.
Ironically, the best state for women entrepreneurs is Texas. You know, the big old red represent.
Well, weren't they close to being a flip state in the midterm elections?
Well,
No.
it seemed like it might have been close, but then after the elections actually started coming out, the votes started getting counted. It wasn't close.
No. To briefly touch on that, and Texas being a flip state, Texas is not as deep red as people think it is. You know, as someone who's lived there, it's never been deep red. It's lean red. You know, it was a deep blue state until Reagan. You know, deep blue state. So much so that like for 100 years there was a Texas state, I think, representative seat for 100 years was held by Democrats. This midterm was swapped over to Republican. Just to show that, like, you know, there were a lot. It went different ways. Like Texas went red in some ways, it went blue in some ways. There was a few flip seat. There were like 2 or 1 flip seat in the House for you know, Democrats, and then the Senate election, it was like 2 or 3 points close. But you have to think about the context. This is Ted Cruz, who in his last election won by only a slightly bigger margin, and is also the most hated man in the Senate. And you know, you have Beto O'Rourke, his candidate, who has done the most fundraising out of any political candidate ever, who lost, and that's mostly because the fundraising was coming from out of state and not in state. It was mostly out of state donations, which is terrible. Yeah, you know, on to, you know, the more local. I'm not surprised. You know, New York State ranked #1 in corruption.
Yeah.
Look at who is our current governor.
Yeah,
And you know,
but
I think the best way for people who don't know to explain, and the best example of his corruption is Cuomo actually started a anti-corruption investigation committee. You know, and you know, they were stamping out some elements of corruption that were in the state government, and then it got over to investigating Cuomo's office and some of his close allies, and then he disbanded the committee right then and there.
yeah.
Another thing
So
on New York State corruption, just real quick, there was a legislator who was instrumental in creating the laws about cryptocurrencies. New York State was actually, I think, the first state ever to have laws about cryptocurrency. Um, and so the state gets money off of the industry now. And as soon as that legislator was basically done bringing these laws in, he went and started his own private firm on cryptocurrency uh, investment, not investment. What do you call it? He advises people on how to invest and things like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of examples of that. I mean, you could go back to the 2008 recession. A lot of the big banking companies that were involved in helping, you know, the crash, and who were doing this risky, you know, giving out these risky loans. A lot of people in the government who were, you know, in defense of their policies and not fighting against any attempts to, you know, fix the problem, or any legislative attempts. Uh, they went on to, you know, join major companies. A lot of these companies that were on, Some of the people who were economic advisors to Bush, or even in the Federal Reserve, were former members of these companies.
Mm-hmm.
So there's if you do a lot of like looking.
Well, the Federal Reserve, just to touch quickly on it, a lot of their members come from the private sector. Almost every single one of them.
Oh
Because they
yeah.
have to come up through the member banks, because the member banks are really the ones who run it. About the organization of it, the president appoints a chair every 14 years, I think, and then there's also a board of governors. But most of the power comes from the member banks. I think we're going to actually skip the Federal Reserve, and we're going to talk about it more in depth on an episode to itself, probably, because there's so much to talk about there in terms of corruption and just in terms of how it affects your country. So I think we're actually going to save that, and we're going to jump into whistleblowers and illegal activism.
Oh man. Oh, whistleblowers.
Yeah, I think whistleblowers is a great topic for corruption, and I think it's a very important one, especially since one of the most infamous whistleblowers and someone who's done, I think, great work for the United States and freedom, Edward Snowden, is still a criminal under our law, and it still has to live in the terrible country of Russia.
And you should look
to
at
escape.
What some of the former district attorneys of our country have said about Edward Snowden. A lot of them want him put to death. They want him put to death.
Yeah, there are people in the government who just want him dead.
Mm-hmm.
So
and mostly because it exposes things about them.
Yeah.
So I know what Snowden did. I just don't know quite what he said. I know he gave government secrets, and that's why it's like treason and everything. What exactly did he say? What did he expose?
So
he didn't say it.
Here's what he did. He didn't actually say much. What he did is he gave the documents to journalists so that they, at their discretion, could decide what the public needs to know versus what is national security. And part of it was because there was so much information that he just couldn't sift through it all. And part of it was because he didn't want his own personal bias to be affecting things. He wanted, he felt like it was wrong, but he didn't want to go totally rogue. He wanted some accountability, some fail safes in there. You know what I mean?
Right. So what did he give to journalists then?
He gave logs and documents about a lot of federal programs. And keep in mind, this wasn't just the NSA. Some of the other agencies that got hit hard by this were, for example, the BND, which is Germany's Federal Intelligence Service. Actually, there's an alliance kind of nations between Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain, Germany, and the United States. They all share intelligence with each other. And they all use the same kind of intelligence tools. And those nations got hit hard by Edward Snowden. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. To touch on what Snowden, did, it was mostly revealing about the spying that the United States was doing.
Right.
There were, I think, the biggest points that you could draw from it are we were spying on other nations, including our ally nations, without their consent, and infiltrating the highest. Well, yeah, and they were spying on us too. This is something that was also revealed in this, and something a lot of people gloss over.
It's like, hey, we're buddies, right? Yeah, definitely buddies.
Yeah, they were infiltrating the highest levels of each other's government and military, to steal secrets from each other. And then the other one is that, your phones, your computers, everything, the NSA and all these agencies have the ability to tap into it at any point without, congressional approval. Instead, there are these secret courts that do it that aren't, I don't even think, elected judges. And they just need approval from them, and they don't even really need approval to do it. But they can tap into your phones regardless if you're convicted of a crime or even subpoenaed of having a crime. They could just do it, right now.
They only need one warrant, and they can get all of your information, because it used to be before the Patriot Act that they would need multiple warrants for multiple devices, but now just one warrant and law enforcement can access everything you own from a distance.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't even know about it.
And they don't even necessarily need a warrant to track your online activity. They
Right.
as long as they say that they're doing it in the attempts to find out terrorist activity that might threaten us all. And you could there's easily arguments to make that this violates the Constitution. I mean, this is
Right.
no due process at all, and yet you were having your privacy completely invaded.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's there. The major argument for people is that Snowden should be a criminal and should be arrested. Besides from government officials, just in general, is that he leaked things that are a danger to national security. Because there's already laws in the books to protect whistleblowers, but they have to prove that they don't have a threat to national security. And the thing is, I think Edward Snowden did a bigger service for national security than harm. Because I think what he revealed is important for the American people to know, and know that they have no security at all from their own state.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you could kind of say that, hey, they're, damaging our relationship with other countries, but I'm honestly, I think other countries already knew that we were spying on them if they were spying on us.
Yeah.
I think that's not like the biggest bombshell for them. Like Germany is gonna send out a message and say, "Oh, how dare you spy on us?" And meanwhile, they're spying on us.
We've caught one of your agents spying on us. But yeah, Edward Snowden. What was the point I was going to make? I mean, we've got the CIA. Everybody knows that we're spying on everybody. But the point that I want to make here is that did you guys see the interview that John Oliver did with Edward Snowden?
I did not.
I didn't watch John Oliver, so no.
All right.
Yeah,
well,
I don't.
John Oliver was a little bit rude for the sake of humor, I think. But what he basically revealed, he went out and interviewed people in the street. A lot of people don't actually care about what Edward Snowden did until it came to the pictures that they were taking and sending to important others, and how the NSA had a special program that reviewed files that were sent in that way. If you guys know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Snowden is such a touchy subject because on one hand, you can't just give out government secrets, but on the other hand,
let's get to that right now.
Actually,
let's get to that right now. Giving out government secrets, that's obviously illegal. We have order for a reason. Order helps us, not have a lot of violence and things like that, and laws are a really important part of that. So when is it okay to break the law?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Like when is it okay? Why do we have laws in the first place? I mean, it's when some people will say when you feel as though it's unjust, but that's so impossibly hard to decide. I mean, Jim Crow laws, I know this is nothing related to it, but it's a good example of a law that you should disobey, but why? Because you feel that it's wrong? I think in the case of whistleblowing and the laws and should we disobey it or not, 110% agree that you should disobey whistleblowing laws, because there are people in the government who don't want those to get out and will do almost anything to make sure those secrets don't get out.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go through the right channels and do it the right way, quote unquote, of whistleblowing, you could end up dead. Ask almost anybody who's tried to go against Hillary Clinton. They know what happens when you speak out against somebody who doesn't want you to speak out.
Right. So let's talk a little bit more specifically. I'm going to name out 4 groups that are very well known for their illegal activism. And I want you guys to say good, bad, or neutral, your stance on them, just right off the bat, and then we'll get into talking more about them. So the first one, Antifa.
Bad.
Peyton?
I'd say bad.
Bad.
Okay. I'd list them as terrorists.
All right. Anonymous.
Neutral.
That depends on. I probably leaning towards neutral, mostly because there are things that I think Anonymous does that are good, and then there are things I think that they do or that are not.
That's where I'm at too.
Okay. Ku Klux Klan.
Oh, bad, terrible, Jesus.
Terrible.
Okay. And last one, Black Lives Matter.
I mean,
they're not.
Depends on what you mean. That depends on what you mean by Black Lives Matter, because
I mean,
Black Lives Matter is a very loose group.
I'd say bad. No matter how you slice it, I think it's bad.
I'm definitely not saying good. I'd say I'm somewhere in between, like leaning towards bad, but more neutral.
Okay.
Because the group is like it's barely a group. It's more of an ideology.
Do you guys have any other well-known groups that I've missed?
I think
WikiLeaks.
4. I mean, WikiLeaks is just one person.
Well, WikiLeaks is not one person. WikiLeaks is more. Julian Assange is the founder, but he's not the one behind all the leaks.
But we're just gonna consider
I'm talking about like
WikiLeaks one person.
WikiLeaks is a large organization.
But
I'd say the biggest thing that WikiLeaks, the only big thing that WikiLeaks has done is the Hillary Clinton scandal. That didn't even do anything.
I would disagree because
they recently revealed a lot of the tools that the CIA had.
Oh yeah,
they release stuff all the time. They do a lot on more than just the United States corruption.
Mm-hmm.
Like I saw
there was
a really good leak. Yeah, there was a really good leak about the Saudi government and a lot of things they were doing.
Here's the thing about a lot of the groups that you just mentioned. Every one of them except one, I'd say, doesn't really matter. Like nobody really pays attention to them. Maybe for a few months. WikiLeaks too. Maybe for a few months, it just has never mattered. But the only exception to that is the Ku Klux Klan, and the reason I say that is because it's still being brought up. The Ku Klux Klan is basically dead. I mean, yeah, there's still like pockets. If you want to go,
I think their own admission total member count is like 5,000 or 8,000 members.
Yeah, it's not that
nationwide.
But we love talking about things like groups like this.
So then let's talk about the most influential group. What group do you guys think you would lean most towards good on? That I mentioned: Antifa, Anonymous, Ku Klux Klan, or Black Lives Matter.
The most good. I think Anonymous has done the most.
Yeah, it's Anonymous.
So
I can't say Antifa did anything.
Let's talk about the good and bad of Anonymous then.
Well, I think the good is that they don't really seem to have a preference as to who they attack, so they just kind of want I don't know, a hacking group is kind of hard because they are anarchists. Most hacking groups are anarchists. But that's not always a bad thing, especially as a conservative. You always think of, anarchy, at least the start of anarchy, or the dismantle of government, to be a good thing. But it's
well, you might be surprised because while a lot of them have a common link of anarchism, they are actually extremely, extremely politically and religiously diverse. You can have them far left, far right, center. They're actually a very diverse group.
There's a lot of different forms of anarchy, and I think Anonymous is more towards left-wing anarchy. That doesn't mean anarcho-communism, but more of the Henry David Thoreau types.
Yeah, I agree.
So what do you guys think are some things that they have done good specifically, and some things that they've done bad specifically?
Oh man, I have to pull up the whole list.
My bad
and
with
keep in mind that not everything that they do gets a lot of publicity, and not all of it even actually gets publicity at all.
Oh yeah, I definitely know that, and that's why I'm less aware of like the things that Anonymous has done. But mostly where my bad stems from them is not actions they've taken, and more of just an ideological opposition. As much as that's like the only reason I didn't put them in good mostly is because of ideological opposition.
In what way?
And while they're more left-wing anarchists, that's the way, and that they're attempts to they're more advocating for a type of anarchy that I don't support, and that's where I differ from them.
What kind of anarchy do you think they're advocating?
That, as I said, the Henry David Thoreau type, a more collectivist type of anarchy, one that isn't exactly based in, any type of system, because like, for example, I have more inclinations, and idealistically I would like to call myself an anarcho-capitalist, and that has some kind of system to the anarchy. But then, there isn't really a system.
Okay.
I think I can appreciate Anonymous when they quote-unquote declared war on the 2016 presidential candidates of the Democratic and Republican Party, but they denounced the official YouTube channel, the Anonymous official YouTube channel.
That's not
it
official. And if
like,
anybody ever, I'm sorry, but Anonymous is extremely loosely. It's not even organized.
Yeah.
So the official YouTube channel is a bunch of bogus. If you look on their YouTube channel, you have a bunch of crazy kooks who dress up and they're wearing like Freemasonry symbols and stuff like that. So and they're all over the place. So and the whole notion of being official isn't that kind of opposite of their whole group?
I don't know. Just from one reading, because I just
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Pulled the list. Just them saying that they don't support it because it goes against their idea of censorship, which I would totally imagine is something that Anonymous is against. I would imagine Anonymous is strongly against censorship because that's what they've fought against. So I can appreciate that, the putting aside the politics to stop something that they believe in. That didn't make any sense. But putting aside your own bipartisan politics to make sure that censorship, doesn't occur, that they stood by their morals even when they disagreed with the person who was against them, I guess.
All right. Is there any?
I think Anonymous's biggest problem is that they're not really an organization.
Right. Like most
they're like a loose. They're a very, very, very loose group who and I think most of them are not well intentioned. Mostly because most of them come from 4chan. I mean, it has its roots in 4chan, and as somebody who has browsed 4chan before and has actually been involved in that, a lot of people who are involved in 4chan are not good people. They're just people who do things for attention and do things because they think it's funny. And I think a lot of the time, when Anonymous targets people, it's they kind of go loose. They go very, very loose with who they target. They gotta be.
I'm gonna have to disagree with that statement a little bit. A while ago, I did some research and I did some interviews with them for a blog post. a lot of the most influential members are not people who come from 4chan or do things for the meme. They, whether or not you agree with their ideology or their methods, they are very serious about it, and they do not do it to be funny. Um, I don't know about all of the members or people who call themselves anonymous, though. But I can say that the most influential members uh, do believe that they have good intentions. They don't just do it to be funny. There has been history in Anonymous where there have been groups that have like popped off, like lulsec, and they actually made like international news frequently at that time because they were just taking down people left and right because they thought it was funny. Like they were taking down government sites, they were taking down gaming sites, and they were just being real jerks.
Well, I think there's a bit of a problem with that because Anonymous, since they're not so structured, people who call themselves anonymous, you know, are very varied. Like, for example, I think one of the biggest things they've done that I disagree with is the amount of doxing they do. They do a lot of doxing. For example,
yes,
in 2012, and I'm against doxing in every way. I think publishing somebody's identity on the internet is extremely harmful to that person. It's an invasion of their privacy, and no matter how terrible this person is, you shouldn't do that. And a great example of this is in 2012, the Westboro Baptist Church was planning to picket
right.
the funerals of, victims of Sandy Hook. And while I think Westboro Baptist Church is terrible, and the people who were doing that are pretty terrible, what they did is they doxed everyone who was going to be involved in that event and published all their information, including their home addresses, on the internet. I think that's terrible because that's actually inviting people to incite harassment and inviting people to do violence against these people. I don't think it is the way to solve this. While I think Westboro Baptist Church is terrible and what they were planning to do is completely morally bankrupt, you don't publish these people's home address and basically wish violence against them and open them up to violence. I think a discussion of ideas is a better way, and there is evidence to show that people's minds can be changed, and the way to do it is not to commit violence against them or dox them and put all their public information online.
Right.
I think the biggest problem with Anonymous is that their attacks are very indiscriminate.
So I agree with you about the doxing, but the argument that they would give in their defense, and let me just say this again, I agree with you. The argument that they would give is that the government is not being responsible enough, and a lot of people just get away with their crimes without receiving any kind of justice or punishment. And so that would be their justification for it. But I don't think that's a good justification because you're just doing it based off of your own moral standards. And there's a lot of potential for you to abuse the power that you have and totally ruin somebody's life.
Well, hold on? I get what you're saying, and I agree that the government does not punish. Like people get away with their crimes, and the government doesn't punish them, and government is bad. I agree, government is terrible. But how is the Westboro Baptist Church going to a funeral and picketing going to ruin your life?
Oh,
these are people who are ruining lives.
I was talking about the doxing. The doxing can ruin lives.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood what you're saying. My bad. But to address another incident, in the wake of the shooting of Michael Brown, which kind of going back to the police thing, I think that was a justified shooting because Michael Brown actually attacked the officer. We have forensic evidence to suggest that. In the wake of that, they decided that they were going to make cyber protests, attack the police, attack Darren Wilson, without any evidence, indicating that Darren Wilson was in the wrong.
So here's something interesting to consider. Um, the whole reason Black Lives Matter exists is because they didn't agree with the way that Anonymous was protesting this issue. Because if you look actually at the video footage and a lot of the things that were recorded when people were protesting this at the time, Anonymous would stand on streets and they would hold signs and they wouldn't really do much about it. It was kind of like slacktivism. Nothing was getting done. They were just out there
And they
saying
would
their
also
opinion.
dox people who, would disagree and say that Michael Brown was justified to be shooting. And they also, again, another terrible group, the KKK.
Let me
I
finish
said
my
this
point. Let me
earlier.
finish my point.
Hold on. I will. I just said
Okay.
this is like further context on the issue. But they doxed a bunch of members of the KKK as well and revealed their home addresses and that too. So they were protesting in the streets too, holding signs, but they were also still doxing people.
I'm going to get to that though. Black Lives Matter did not like the kind of mild-mannered approach that Anonymous had. And so Black Lives Matter grew out of mostly peaceful protests, and they started getting more radical, including doxing people, including violent protests. And so Black Lives Matter is an extremely radical activism group that came out of what started as a peaceful movement. And so while Anonymous was involved to some degree, I think a lot of the blame goes to Black Lives Matter.
Oh yeah, I agree, but there's evidence that Anonymous was directly involved in the doxing of a lot of people after the Michael Brown incident specifically.
Well, what evidence is there? Because anybody can claim to be anonymous.
The fact that multiple people identified to be, anonymous officials, as you would have it, people identified to be with the group, people have been identified as doing other anonymous attacks, were behind the doxing of several people.
Do you have a source for that? Because I'd be interested to read about that.
I have a source, so it's from the Wikipedia and then their source, which was, hold up, I will look for it, but yeah, but most of my problems with the Anonymous is they're not a organized group who do things. So really pinning down what is anonymous is hard.
Mm-hmm.
Pinning down what is everybody in the group and which actions are anonymous and which aren't is very hard. And then also the fact that they are behind so much doxing, and they do so much doxing, and they're more of a group that is more Gawker. Ugh.
Well, they actually I'm reading it right now, and they're citing their sources. So I do agree with you. I see your point now.
Yeah, but yeah. So what was I saying? I was saying, oh yeah. But they're behind so much doxing, and they harm a lot of people, and they don't have a lot of aim. And I think they're more ideologically driven than a lot of people give them credit. I mean, there are great things they've done. I think the Arab Spring is a very good example of something they've done good. They were helping to spread the message there and helping spread, a revolution kind of in the Middle East of people saying we're not going to deal with these fundamentalist Islamic laws anymore and the oppression of these countries.
And they were fighting big on censorship in 2012 when Mega Upload went down. They were just like, no, we're not taking that.
Yeah, but then sometimes they do a stupid thing and they dox people and they reveal their home address
or they
to people who are
they
largely harmless.
Everybody.
Well, and also when they attacked the PlayStation Network, like what was the point of that?
Was that Lizard Squad?
See,
because Lizard Squad is not anonymous.
Yes, I know. Lizard Squad. So Anonymous is credited with the first time it happened. It happened twice, actually. and they're credited with the first time. The second time,
well, was that Lulz?
was anonymous. It was anonymous, but the people who were behind it, who were from Anonymous, were like fractured out, and they became Lizard Squad.
Okay, so both times it was the fractured group. It was Lulzsec and Lizard
No,
Squad.
the first time it was not a fractured group.
Oh, well, then why did Anonymous attack them?
I have no idea. See, that's the thing. That's what I'm talking about. What was the point of it? I have yet to find a point to either of these hacks. Or at least a point that, is justified to shut down PlayStation servers and affect, thousands of people's jobs, and also ruin people from playing online, which is not as big as an impact as, the fact that people's jobs were on the line, that people weren't able to do their job, and even back then, on PlayStation, there was somewhat of an economic aspect. There were people who let's play, post gaming videos from their PlayStation who can't do that anymore. That was a stream of income that they had disrupted.
Okay.
Because
so
the thing,
I looked into it, and yes, it was actually anonymous. Their reasoning for it was because they disagreed with Sony's official policies, I guess. But yeah,
and
right.
that doesn't make sense. Why would you bring down the servers if you disagree with policies? There's other ways to go about it.
Yeah.
I just think that sometimes they decide to get radical for a situation that isn't. A lot of their corporate protests, they go to the radical extreme of, doxing people left and right, and instead of when, there's easier and more civil ways to do it, boycotts.
So let's get back to the overall subject then, illegal activism. So what you're saying, if I'm getting this right, is that it's okay to break the law in some cases, but you have to be very, very careful about the way in which you go about it. Is that what you're saying?
I would say, I don't know about Alex, but I would say it's a very gray issue. It really depends on the case. It really depends on the law that you're talking about. It really depends on who your target is.
So yeah, we're back to this.
It's not
nothing is black and white.
Yeah, nothing is black and white. A lot of things for me, it's a case-by-case basis. I can't give you an absolute answer as much as I'd love to.
So here's my take on this. And the reason we call it alt-centrism, or radical alt-centrism, actually, is because there's the centrist part of it, that nothing is black and white, and that you really have to take everything case by case. And then there's the alt part, or the radical part, and that's where I'm saying, yeah, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. Not to say that they were justified in attacking PlayStation. People couldn't play their games. But in some cases, like when the government shut down Mega Upload, I mean, what else are you going to do if the government is just going to censor you?
Of course. And I think the government, when the government is the target, typically, and not always, but typically, I would say it's more justified in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because the government is the big baddie in almost every case. And I would say that the government can take hits.
Yeah.
It goes back to, there's no one competing with the government. There's only one government, and there's nothing really we can do about it. And the things we can do about it tend to not be effective.
Yeah. So I think we're going to wrap up the episode now. One at a time, I think we're going to, say our last words. Anything that we didn't get to say that we really wanted to say, and anything that we want people to really take away from this, our main message. Does anybody volunteer to go first before we end?
Well, yeah, corruption is not easy. We talked about it earlier. New York State is the quote unquote most corrupt, right? but it's not easy. You can't just take one example or just take one situation and say this applies to every situation, and it's a very, very gray issue, and especially about everything about whistleblowers and hacking groups, hacking activists, all that. It really is a gray situation. I mean, because there are some people who, quite honestly, deserve to be doxxed, and there are some people who don't. It's such a gray area when you break the law. I mean, obviously, an easy answer is, well, you just don't break the law, but we all know there are great people in this world who wouldn't have been so great if they just bowed their head and followed the law. Sometimes laws are made to be broken, and it's a very gray area. You just have to take each situation. You have to play it by ear, because I mean, there's no such thing as a generalized definition of corruption, because it differs. We talked about a lot tonight. That's the number one thing, is that it's been different. There's not one story that's like another. So everything is gray. Just play it by ear. I guess that's my last message.
All right, Peyton.
Yeah. I think to encapsulate what I have to say about corruption is mostly that corruption is going to always happen. There is no way to stamp out corruption. And I think the best way we can deal with corruption is, nullify the effects of corruption. Like Alex said earlier in the podcast, we need to limit the power that the government has, because they're the biggest perpetrators of corruption. And I think that by nature, all governments are going to have corruption. That's just the nature of government and the nature of any society that has ever existed. And I think corruption from corporations is also something we need to be, worried about. Corruption from groups, even from the illegal activist groups we talked about, like Anonymous, the fact that they were doxing, everyday people and doing all these things. We have to hold people accountable. We have to hold these organizations accountable in any way we can. With corporations, boycott them when they do something you think is wrong. In the case of groups, don't condone their actions, don't support them, don't help them out. And in the case of governments, there's less that you can do, but there are things you can do. If illegal activism is justified in this case, do that. Protest against them. Vote against people who are corrupt. Vote against people who have put in policies that increase the government's ability to commit corruption that affects you. And most importantly, protect yourself. I think it's important that you protect yourself. I think that's why we have the Second Amendment, is to protect ourselves from the tyranny of the state, to protect ourselves from the government. And I think you just need to inform yourself and prepare yourself for anything the government may throw at you, and be ready to fight back against it.
All right. Last thing that I really want to say is I'd like to link the ideas of corruption and power. Corruption is most effective when you have a lot of power. And a good indicator of how much power you have is whether or not you have a monopoly. So whether it's a corporate monopoly, cartel-like monopoly where it's corporate but illegal, or whether it's a government monopoly, a monopoly on violence. That is a really good indicator that you have a lot of power. And wherever you have a lot of power, there's going to be a greater chance that there is going to be corruption. And the corruption is going to affect far more people a lot more severely. So I think we need to really keep that in mind, that you can see you can see power in a lot of different organizations and even in a lot of individuals. Uh, and I think we have to be very, very aware of that and where it is. As for how we address it, I think that we need to call out corruption where we see it. Uh, we can't be afraid. We can't just look down our entire lives, because if we do that, nothing will get better for ourselves and nothing will get better for anyone else. Even if it, in the short term, makes things worse, it's definitely worth it in the long term to make a change. So call it out, and don't allow for so much power to exist, because power is really where the problem lies with corruption, I think.
Well said. And before we close out today's podcast, I'd just like to say a few things about the podcast in the future and going forward. First of all, we have a Discord server that'll be in the description of today's video and today's podcast.
And I'll put the link
as
on
well.
the screen.
Yeah, you can put the link on screen, and we'll also have it in the description. But as well, we'd love to hear your suggestions in the comments and on the Discord server for what we should do next time, what the topic should be for next time. I know we're discussing that.
I'll put a straw poll in
also,
the description.
guests. I would like to thank our guest today, Alex, for being here.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, it was very great to have you. We'd love to have you back again, sometime. And as well, we want to talk about upload schedule. I would like to say realistically, keep out for at least once a month. We'd like to try to do bi-weekly, at least 2 a month. But, we'll have to see with our very busy schedules. And we're hoping that we can continue this podcast and, you'll listen in and we can continue to grow.
Also,
and hopefully we can up the production value as well.
So also, give us your feedback. We don't care how rude you are. We can handle cyberbullies. We want to know what you guys think, how we can make things better, how we could make things worse even. I don't know. Ideas, suggestions, whatever. We want to hear from you guys.
Yeah, we really want to know. Yeah, I think the first suggestion is going to be for me to stop yawning. But we're doing it so late at 9:43. I know that's not late for most people, but I get tired very easily. But yeah, I would like to. But I would like to thank you guys. Yeah, we're note to self record earlier, but I'd like to thank you guys all for tuning in, and hopefully you'll tune in next time.
Yeah, thanks. Remember, radical alt-centrism. Share the word, spread it. Subscribe, give us money. We don't have ads, so don't actually give us money. But yeah, thanks for listening.